Is Super Back to the Future 2 the best Back to the Future game? Super Back to the Future 2 is a Super Famicom game that never made it overseas from Japan. Originally released in July 1993, the game retells the story of the second Back to the Future movie in the format of a platformer that's loaded from top to bottom in colorful chibi graphics. Now, I've always been a fan of Back to the Future. I'd watched these movies religiously growing up and have done everything from dress up as Marty McFly for Halloween to pick up the official novelization for the second movie and Photoshop my best friend and I into a frame from the third one. So I vividly remember how shocked I was to find out that this game existed. In fact, the original Japanese ROM for the game was one of the first things I had ever emulated when I had gotten my first laptop back in middle school. But while I remember being excited about playing this game, I actually don't remember playing the game itself, which is kinda weird. I do own a reproduction card of a fan-made English translation though, because, let's face it, this thing is freaking awesome, look at it. So does Super Back to the Future 2 hold up, and is it the best Back to the Future game? While a quick scan through YouTube and the internet would have you believe that it's a fine title and may even be a bit of a hidden gem, I honestly had a pretty rough experience with this one. Now, this could be due to having unfair expectations for this game given how much I love the franchise, but it also could just be because it isn't a very well designed game. At any rate, I would call Super Back to the Future 2 interesting though, so let's dive into things. Super Back to the Future 2 was developed by Daft Co Ltd and spans 20 stages across 6 levels, including boss fights. The game revolves around Marty McFly zipping through stages and avoiding hazards while riding the Mattel hoverboard from Back to the Future Part 2. In between levels, you're treated to cutscenes that provide a SparkNotes glimpse into the plot of the movie. While they're simple in execution and leave out a lot of the story and nuance from the movie, there's no denying that watching them brought a smile to my face during my playthrough. And could you blame me? I mean, look at these things, they're adorable. For the most part, the game's level design is unfortunately a little uninspired, if not somewhat problematic. The levels are usually split between flat and inclined areas where Marty can pick up speed on his hoverboard, and platform-heavy segments where he'll need to carefully navigate through obstacles. In a lot of ways, the levels are actually designed a lot like the classic Sonic series, giving the player areas where he can pick up a lot of speed and zip through obstacles before being forced to slow down and play more methodically. These levels also include coins, which are used as currency to buy health and other temporary power-ups. While I love some of these open areas and think that zipping through them can be fun, there are a few too many moments where jumping off of a ramp or platform will lead to Marty spending an extremely long time in free fall with nothing to do. This comes in stark contrast to the game's more platform-heavy sections, which are almost too full of platforms and obstacles to navigate past. These platform challenges also tend to stick out like a sore thumb and ruin any immersion you may have in the game by being so inorganically worked into the level. For example, in Level 3 Stage 1, there's a long shaft that you're tasked with climbing. However, instead of disguising this platforming challenge as something that could actually be a part of the world that the game takes place in, it's literally just a bunch of platforms that need to be climbed. The level doesn't even designate which of the platforms you're about to step onto are moving ones, which means you'll need to trial and error your way through this section a few times until you've memorized the layout. Moments like these are relatively dull, as there's no inherent challenge here outside of a few enemies that can fall on top of you. And while I'm glad that there isn't a bottomless pit to punish you at the bottom of the shaft, that's also an issue in itself, as there's literally no penalty for failing this section, other than needing to restart it. Again, while I appreciate that there isn't an insta-death at the bottom of the segment, I also can't help but feel like the lack of any real hazard here makes this section pointless at best. I understand the fact that you need platforming challenges in a platformer, but I can't help but feel like these segments feel really inorganic and take me out of the colorful and playful world that the game has done such a great job at constructing. There are multiple instances in Super Back to the Future 2 where very gamey obstacles are presented that make little to no sense for existing in the first place. While one does need to suspend their disbelief when they're playing a video game, seeing sharp Mega Man-esque spikes in the middle of a cemetery or casino is still pretty jarring, especially when they're thrown all over the place and slow the game down to a crawl. And it's a shame too, because so much of this game seems like it's trying to encourage me to clear the stages as fast as possible, while also forcing me to constantly stop and wait for platforms or hazards to move. In that regard, I guess that makes it a bit like Marble Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog. One thing I do need to compliment here is the game's art style though, as it's the best part of this game by far. Everything's portrayed with a really likable and cute edge. Even when you're facing up against drunks and gang members in the alternate 1985 stages, it's kinda hard not to find their designs charming. The game sprites are all well detailed and appropriately playful. The game's backgrounds are also well designed, though they don't seem to have any layering or parallax scrolling in them. It's not a deal breaker by any stretch of the word, as they're extremely detailed for the Super Famicom, but they definitely look and feel a little flat. As for the game's sound, it's also great. Daft Co managed to snag the rights to the Back to the Future theme, and it has several variations in the soundtrack that are amazing. I'm particularly fond of the second arrangement for the game's second level. There's something about the playful whistle sounds in it that just gets me. You gotta hear this. The game's original music also isn't that bad, and neither are its sound effects. At the very least, everything lines up pretty well with the visual presentation, which means that the weaker tracks in the game's biggest offense is that they just aren't as catchy as the Back to the Future theme. But once we get past the game's music and graphics, there's only one thing left to talk about: the gameplay, and unfortunately, that's where this game loses me. I've already mentioned that the level design and layouts are on the uninspired side, and while I can overlook that for a lot of games, I just wasn't able to do that here. And unfortunately, that falls squarely on the game's controls and performance. The controls themselves are fairly standard. You can control Marty by hitting left and right on your D-pad, and you can get him to jump and dash with the Y/A and the B buttons respectively. While it's a little weird having to jump with the Y or A button at first, given this is a Super Famicom game and that 16-bit games were, usually mapped to the B button and all that junk, you can actually get used to this pretty easily. Plus, if you're playing this game on an emulator, and let's be honest, you probably would, you can always remap the buttons to something a bit more intuitive for you. The main problem with the controls is how Marty himself handles. While moving from left to right is controlled with the D-pad, I never feel that confident that Marty's going to move the way I'm trying to get him to. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this game's sense of physics and momentum just feels off. It kind of feels like my inputs either aren't being read properly, or as if I was streaming the game over the internet and didn't have a solid connection. The same also applies to the game's jumping, and honestly, its general performance when there are multiple moving assets on the screen. There are moments when this game chugs, and it makes simple platforming challenges a lot harder than they would be otherwise. And I can't help but be disappointed by all of that, because I'm convinced that there's a decent enough game behind these issues. The game's presentation shows that it had a lot of potential and work put into it, but I can't look past these performance issues due to how it impacts my experience of actually playing the game. The game itself is seemingly designed for pretty quick and stylish gameplay, again, sort of like Sonic. For example, the game really likes to line enemies up in a row so that you can bounce from enemy to enemy, using the inertia of your previous hit to keep moving forward. In theory, that's awesome. You can tell that they may have been inspired by Bonk's Adventure for the PC Engine and how you can similarly string along combos in that game. But in practice, it's hard to actually enjoy doing that due to how the game's performance issues ramp up the difficulty. And if it weren't for these issues, the game probably wouldn't be that hard. While it doesn't have checkpoints and it does feature game overs, each level has an easy to remember password and you can set the game to start with 5 lives. You also get 3 hits before you lose a life, and you can pick up health in vending machines if you have enough coins. But unfortunately, that isn't enough to offset the game's very artificial difficulty problem. If anything, it feels like trying to put a band-aid on a broken arm. If you do decide to give this game a shot, I highly recommend playing this game on an emulator that supports overclocking your game for improved performance. I initially played this on OpenEMU on my MacBook, and after switching over to an overclocked SNES 9X core on RetroArch, found that the game ran much better. It certainly doesn't fix the game, as its issues also seem to involve the actual implementation of the controls, but it does improve the experience by a noticeable amount thanks to the improved frame rate. So is Super Back to the Future 2 the best Back to the Future game? No. While this may have been the best option that gamers had for over 20 years, Telltale's take on the franchise was a much truer to the film experience and provided fans with the opportunity to go on a new adventure through Hill Valley. Super Back to the Future 2, on the other hand, is a bare-bones and undercooked, dare I say raw, platformer that does a fine enough job of recapping the second movie, but fails to actually be worth playing outside of its presentation. For what it's worth though, I don't hate this game. I actually think it was pretty ambitious and creative for what it did with the Back to the Future property. Like I said earlier, I loved the game's huge detailed sprites, and I also loved its playful and solid soundtrack. The game itself was just a bit too under-designed and unoptimized for me, which is a shame. The game feels like it was begging to be on different, more optimized hardware, and that makes me wonder whether this game would have benefited from something like the Super FX chip or appearing on something like the 32X or a stock Sega Genesis, what with it having a faster processor than the SNES. At any rate, outside of emulation, I can't really say I'd recommend this one to fans of the series, and even then that's kinda pushing it. It may have been the best Back to the Future game we had back in the day, but this game has aged pretty badly due to its performance issues. I am kinda happy that I own a repro of its English patch though, I guess. At the very least, it looks nice on my shelf. And with that said and done, that brings us to the end of this video. Do any of you guys remember playing any of the licensed Back to the Future games? I'd love to hear a bit about that, or any other movie licensed games that you remember playing in the comment section. On top of that, if you have a game that you want me to check out, feel free to recommend it in the comments or over on Twitter or Instagram. You can find a link to those in the description of this video. Until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this review and have a great day. So yeah, bye.